It was really an interesting and I thought a very healthy way to grow up. We lived in a neighborhood, it was called the West End. Early on, around 1900s, it had been a black neighborhood, and then it became more immigrants. And eventually, by the time we came along, it was about 60% Italian, and about 25 or 30% Jewish, Yiddish-speaking Jews. But there was a street called Spring Street, which was where most of the Jewish shops were. And the shopkeepers there all spoke Yiddish. So my grandmother, if she wanted to shop there, never had to speak English, never had to worry about the language. She could go and do all her business in Yiddish. It was really a village life. Before a refrigerator, we had an ice box, which meant that it was a box with two compartments. The top compartment was where they put the ice, a block of ice. The bottom compartment was where all the food went. We had an iceman who put a block of ice on his shoulder and came up to 2 or 3 flights. He was an Italian who spoke Yiddish. He learned to speak Yiddish because he had a lot of Yiddish customers. So it was that kind of a crossover relationship. The Italians spoke Yiddish, the Jews spoke Italian, some did. And my friends were all a mix of Jews and Italians. We lived, second floor was Italian, third floor was Jewish. And you could tell who the occupants were by the smell of the food. Above all, I learned to accommodate the needs of others, because there were 6 of us living in tight quarters, and you had to have a concern about what other people needed. There was 1 bathroom, so there was a lot of sharing going on. You couldn't monopolize. With my father and my grandfather both working the way we did, the way they did, I think I learned a very, very big respect for responsibility. Those guys were very responsible people. They worked 6, 7 days a week. And we lived fairly comfortably because there were 2 incomes coming into the apartment, my dad and my grandfather. My grandfather left in the dark every morning and came home at dark every night. And he worked in a leather factory, cutting the patterns for leather luggage. In those years, in the 30s and 40s, leather was what good luggage was made from. And they made good leather suitcases. They allowed him to take the scraps, the leftover unusable pieces, to take them home, where he made key cases and wallets. There was always the smell of leather in our apartment. And he made things like this, simple, very crude but efficient. Put the zipper in, and he would put together a dozen of these and take them to stores, downtown Boston, jewelry stores or whatever, and sell them for $1 a piece and bring home $10 to $12 extra from his homework. So I still have this, I don't remember how I got it, but I treasure it, this piece of his work. When I would come home for a visit, sitting next to him, the first thing he would do would be reach down and examine my shoes, the leather of my shoes. Somehow I had the feeling that he was trying to determine how well I was doing or how poorly I was doing, depending on the condition of the leather of my shoes. If the leather was in good shape, I was okay. It was great land value and very little tax revenue coming from this low rent neighborhood. And some very smart people, from a financial point of view, did what they had to do. They tore it all down, put up some very expensive high-rise buildings in a very desirable area. And where people have been paying $30 a month for rent, now the rent's for $300 or $400 a month, 10 times as much as what they had been paying. The theory was that these people could move back in, but they couldn't afford to. So they all were scattered. From a social aspect, it was a tragedy, because a wonderful, tight community was destroyed. To this day, there are ill feelings about it in Boston. And there's a West End museum that I visited not long ago to kind of keep the memory alive of what it was, because it was a very powerful influence in a lot of people's lives. A lot of people still consider themselves West Enders, kind of proud heritage. I have a house in Lake Tahoe that we call West End. I have a boat up there that's named West End. I'm very sentimental about the West End. I saw footage of the buildings being destroyed, these giant wrecking balls crashing into these buildings and buildings coming down. When I was growing up in that neighborhood, it was horse and wagons. And there was a guy came through with push carts down the street, yelling, he said, Weiber, wir haben bedacht, Weiber, Weiber. Calling out the wives, you know, we have thread and we have needles and we have cloth and we have ribbon and we have, what do you need? It's all here on the push cart. And there was a guy who came around selling crabs. Hobbity gobbity! Hobbity gobbity! People would come out to buy a crab. In the building that I lived in, 87 Chambers Street, the downstairs was a storefront that had once been a credit union. Had gone out of business, but the sign in the lettering on the window still said Harry Rubin Credit Union, no longer there. And that space was rented now by a man who sold linoleum off a wagon. So he kept the linoleum in the front and he lived with his wife in the back. That was the kind of life it was. It was like a little shtetl life, you know. Gone. Oh, gone. The only thing that remained, interesting and ironically, was the Catholic Church, which was right in the middle of the neighborhood. That was left untouched. St. Joseph's Catholic Church was left untouched. It's still there to this day. Everything else around it changed. All the streets, the configurations, totally changed. The buildings, all gone.